Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ion Canon podcast, your home for in-depth discussion on lore, the High Republic, and the whole canon of the galaxy far, far away. My name is Joel, and I'm coming to you live from Underworld, Orange County. All right, so this week, the Empire is one of the most famous factions of all of Star Wars. Probably the most famous, quite frankly. More than the Separatists, the Rebellion, even the Jedi, the Empire is kind of one of the big symbols of Star Wars. It represents everything evil, everything tyrannical, just one big allegory. But how is the Empire being depicted throughout this franchise, though? In what ways has time changed our views of the Empire, or kept them in place? And in order to discuss this, I brought back my good friend and yours, Mr. Redleader Antillies. Red, how you doing this week?
Good, good. Excited to talk about the entire concept of the Empire in Star Wars. Maybe the Empire is all the way back to the first drafts. I don't know if even the Rebellion is as fleshed out.
No, I mean, in a lot of ways, yeah. I mean, I kind of wish the Empire kind of is Star Wars in a certain sense, like that and the Jedi. I don't even know if the Jedi are old. Is the Empire older than the Jedi even?
No, there's Jedi as a name, but there's like the Dai Bendu.
But
Because
true.
I'm pretty sure at the beginning it is kind of more Dai Bendu helping Alderaan or Hadabadan or whatever the original name was against the Empire. I don't remember if the rebellion is exactly like a fully formed thing, because even the Wookiee stuff is just, oh, they stumble upon these Wookiees on Yavin 4 and they team up and steal Y-Wings, which are an Imperial fighter, and destroy the Death Star or do the attack or whatever. So everything
Yeah.
else was kind of dubious, but just around the Empire and the conflict with them as the core.
Well, we'll get to that soon enough. But yes, very exciting to be here, especially because I saw one of the things we will be talking about. Plug and shout out to our good friend Corey Datapad, who we will be talking about Thrawn as well when this discussion happens, so that'll be fun. But of course, plug as always, you can follow us at the Yoncan Pod, both on Twitter and on Blue Sky. And of course, follow us on the Star Wars Underworld Discord. Have not decided what we'll do this week. Maybe we'll do a game night again. So that will be fun as always. So yeah, with that, no week in Star Wars. I'll decide to skip that, but I'll do a brief eye on screen. I have seen Skeleton Crew, and if you want my thoughts with Matthew, go watch last week's Tractor Beam. But I'll give my general thoughts again. Really strong two-part opener. Really interesting mystery behind Planet. The kids have great chemistry. So if you're worried about child actors, no, these kids got great. They feel like kids. They feel very natural. They got very good chemistry. Neil is adorable, little elephant dude. Lots of intriguing things world building wise, which would be interesting. And the reason I'm keeping this vague is Red. I don't think you've seen Skeleton Crew, have you?
No.
Okay, so I'm going to keep it as vague as possible. But yes, very strong two-part premiere. Episode 3 will be continuing on Tuesday. So look forward to that. That is my brief, not spoiler review of Skeleton Crew episodes 1 to 2 for your sake. So let's get down to some news. And I got a doozy for you guys out there. According to Variety, this broke after it was rumored just merely seconds ago, but Variety broke it, so it's probably more true now than ever. Stinky has returned. That's right. Rhoda the Hutt will be in The Mandalorian and Grogu, played by Jeremy Allen White from The Bear. And my reaction is, holy moly, and this is genius. Like, oh my god, after just vanishing forever, Rhoda the Hutt, Jabba's son, is back. I'm still in disbelief and shock, and I love the stunt casting. This is hilarious stunt casting, but it's kind of genius. He'll also be joining, I guess, Sigourney Weaver as well in this movie. So we got some pretty big stars here. But Red, what is your reaction to the return of Stinky?
I've wanted Rhoda to be brought back at some point for a very long time. He seems like such a weird dangling thread.
I
And like
know.
I get that the TCW wanted to move away from its beginnings and the movie and everything. I mean, they blew up the Twilight, which I'm still upset about the way they handled that. But Rhoda just disappeared and was never really mentioned again.
And even it's weird because Jabba appears in other episodes. Not much, but he does. Like it's not even like he just Rhoda just sitting in a little crib by his dad's side. Yeah, that is one of those things. You're right. It's like they dropped a lot of stuff from like season one of TCW. Like the Twilight goes away after a while. A lot of the more Ahsoka trying to be kind of hip, like Sky Guy and R2E, that goes away. Snips came back to Ahsoka, which I thought was nice. By Hayden Christensen, it's kind of cool. But yeah, Rhoda's like proto Baby Yoda, but didn't get popular. Unfortunately, he just Jabba has a son. I mean, TCW was already stretching a lot already. It was like Anakin has a Padawan, Jabba has a son. Okay, I'll go with it, I guess. It's like at least with Ahsoka, we got like 7, 8 seasons of her, and now more. Where it's like, yeah, whatever did happen to Rhoda? Is he still a baby? How old is he? Do Hutts age slowly? Here's some speculation with such a big act. Well, I don't know how big an actor Jeremy Allen White is. I mean, I guess The Bear is pretty popular. Never seen The Bear, so I don't know. But I guess with them getting the specific actor, do you think Rhoda's gonna speak basic, or do you think it's just gonna be let's just get this actor to speak Huttese, but he won't sound like himself? Like, what do you think? Because I know Hutts can't speak basic.
Didn't Ben Schwartz play BB-8?
Did he? I don't know.
I think he is it, or someone.
I know.
Yeah, it was Bill Hader and Ben Schwartz. So you never know when it's a very big actor because you got those guys, and they were in Star Wars for 3 films and Star Wars Resistance.
True.
And that was to play a little ball that goes just beep occasionally. Has a hell of a lot of personality, but they could easily have. I mean, hell, they could have cast. I wouldn't put it past them to cast like Christopher Walken just to like make some goo goo and gaga sounds. Like they could do that, and they would. So this could be either he's going to speak basic. It could be him speaking Huttese. I mean, because Baby Yoda, do you think they would keep him as a child still and have those two interact?
Well, Mandalorian Grogu is taking place like just a few months after season 3, so probably unless they're going to growth spurt him. I would like to know he will be a child because I've seen the footage of Mandalorian Grogu. He's still a baby.
I mean Rhoda.
Oh, Rhoda.
If Rhoda's still a child, they could have those two interact and have baby hijinks. Is what I'm thinking.
I don't know. That's a question because like I can really see this going one of 2 ways. What you're suggesting, baby hijinks. Or, and this is kind of more what I want, teenage, young adult Rhoda, because he's got a growth spurt now, and kind of just, him either helping Din and Grogu out because, hey, we got to hunt down the Imperial remnant. Which, fun fact, I'm gonna tell you guys a little story. My buddy Red here actually kind of did that story during a Star Wars RPG we did for a few weeks, which was awesome. So that's kind of what I want. I want the RPG.
Years ago. I've been wanting this for years.
I know. I hope it's more your RPG. I mean, I know that was set during the First Order Resistance War, and this is set like in the Mando era. But hey, I don't know how Hutts grow. So for all we know, he could be a teenager. I know somebody really wants to go the Gracchus the Putt route and have him be ripped. Kind of cool.
Yeah.
It'd just be like a big guy, which would be awesome. What would you want? Like, do you want more your helping Mando and Grogu through Underworld contacts? Be, helping him hunt down Imperial remnants and maybe like, hey, there's this blue guy causing trouble. Named Thrawn.
Okay, I legitimately thought you meant Max Rebo when you said blue guy. You're thinking Tatooine, and I was like, "What? What? What do we? Oh, right, that guy."
The other blue guy, not that.
Max Rebo is still at large. He didn't die in Book of Boba Fett. He isn't there.
Yes, yes, he
It's
is okay.
it's a big conspiracy thing. No, it was an inside job. Well, it
Exactly.
literally was. We saw them put down the thing. But yeah, I really want them to go the direction of okay, we're doing these seedy underworld things, but Rhoda's just chill. Like he's not even like someone they have an agreement with
Mhm,
or like grief in season one,
mhm.
but instead just like he knows a lot about the underworld and he's buddies with the Alliance and stuff.
Right.
Have a good guy Hut.
Yes. I mean, we have a good guy Hut that's not in the books. Uh, I agree with that. I did read in the Variety article that it's not just going to be a cameo; it will be a prominent role. So that's possible. I don't know what that means. Like again, because it could be baby hijink, but like I don't know. I don't think they want like two babies fighting it out for popularity here. Well, there can only be one cute baby. I do know Grogu will.
Was Gracchus the one that was in the Poe comics as well?
Yes, Gracchus was in the original Jason Fry run and the Poe
Yeah, because he
comic
had the
book.
holocrons and stuff.
Right. He
Okay,
was
yeah. So because Gracchus helped the Resistance, he was kind of working on it for himself, but he helped Poe out and had a pretty friendly relationship with the Resistance, all things considered. So
I think
I do wonder if we're gonna get something like that.
it would be cool, although I don't know how Mando could do this because it's not like these two are super close. But it would be kind of cool if there's that part of Rhoda that kind of remembers. Oh yeah, I remember this. This Ahsoka. He was nice for like a few days. And that kind of like just changes his trajectory in life. There's also my buddy Matthew has brought this up, although I'm not quite sure if this was ever meant to be Rhoda. It could be that the Mos Pelgo, that's Cobb Vance's town, was like trying to raise a Hutling to be benevolent. I wonder if that'll connect in any way. Cobb Vance, I mean, I hope Cobb Vance shows up. Because
Would be that
what's
makes
what's
sense.
but like also like what's Rhoda thinking like Boba Fett now? Like Boba's taking over his dad's house. So that would be interesting. But no, I agree. I want a good guy Hut. I think Rhoda would be really interesting as a good guy, or even just like a more, that'd be like the nicest guy. It's like I'm not making deals with the Empire at this point. Like I'm doing the opposite of what my dad did. Like dad was all
Yeah,
good, but he was very, but like not me. I'll help you hunt down these Imperial remnants.
kind of like Lando when we first meet him, without the whole actually making the deal.
Yeah, yeah, a little bit more honorable, a little bit more. I don't do the slavery thing. Maybe I
That or
still.
he's like literally a New Republic senator, which would be fun.
Oh, that'd be hilarious. I mean, hey, I'm waiting for the Hut Chancellors to come back, man. Bring back a Hunt Chancellor. Bring back the Pious D. Me and my friends have been talking about like, we need the Pious D back, man. We need the Pious D back.
It's such a fun concept.
I know,
But
especially if,
out of universe.
oh yeah, out of the universe, in universe,
In universe, it's horrifying.
Oh yeah, like I was talking to some friends of mine, and it's like it'd be cool because like if Republic's gonna exist for 25,000 years, let's have multiple slips into authoritarianism. Why don't you? Palpatine doesn't have to be the first one. He's not that special. You're not special, Palpatine. But no, very exciting for Clone Wars fans and fans of Huts to see Rhoda the Hutt return after 2008. Probably the last time we saw him. Did we ever see him again, even just like for a cameo in season one?
I could have sworn he was in an intro to an episode, but I might be wrong about that.
Let me look it up. Let me look up good old Wikipedia here.
I
Okay.
vaguely remember an image of him next to Jabba.
He is. Oh, wow. Okay, so he really only does appear in the movie. Oh, no. He appears in an episode called Spheres of Influence. I don't remember what that's about.
Oh, isn't that's
Let's see.
isn't that a season finale?
That's a apparently that took place in the third season. It's in between. Let's see.
Oh yeah, this is when Greedo is trying to kill. Yeah, I think he I think we see him at the beginning of that episode.
Oh yeah, I see
Oh
Jabba
yeah,
also. Yeah.
he's there when Jabba gives the contract or whatever.
Right. So probably.
Because
So
it's
yeah.
when Greedo's trying to kill George Lucas.
That's right. That's right. I was talking to a friend about that the other day. It's like George Lucas getting to animate George Lucas is probably the most epic thing ever. So yeah. Okay. So at least he appeared in the third season. So not since 2008, but a long time. So very exciting to see the return of old Stinky.
Wait, Jennifer Hale plays Senator Chuchi?
I guess so.
Huh.
As she always plays Senator Tucci because she appears in Bad Batch too, and so
Guess so.
oh yeah, okay, that's cool. No, more you know. So yeah, that'd be cool. Glad to see Road to the Hut return. All right, let's get into the main topic now, shall we? Depictions of the Galactic Empire. As we stated before, the Galactic Empire, probably the oldest concept in Star Wars outside the Jedi itself. It's an allegory for anything evil that you want it to be, pretty much. And because of that, because Star Wars has been around for dang 40 plus years, almost 50, it's molded, it's changed over time. The allegory is always a little different. So we're gonna start off with the depicting of the Galactic Empire. And we're going to start off with this kind of interesting question, a bit of a political science question. So I'm going to ask you this, Red. From a political science standpoint, if you just take the original trilogy, nothing else, just 4, 5, 6, no supplementary material, no RPGs, just the original 3 movies, is the Galactic Empire a fascist state?
Honestly, if we're going by the films,
Yes.
I would kind of say yeah. If nothing
Okay.
else, because we don't get enough for that to be disproven. We only can rely on, like, if we're looking at like what is being portrayed to us,
Mm-hmm.
it's not a definitive thing, but there's more, I think, straightforward. Well, okay, this is shorthand, but everything about it seems pretty fashy. You just aren't getting into the specifics. I think once you get into the specifics, there's complications to that,
Mm-hmm.
nuances people try and throw in, or even just misunderstandings a lot of people have, and a lot of, I think,
Grand
pop
Admiral
culture
Thrawn.
has. Uh, Partially Thrawn, but even more so some of the, I think some of the more direct attempts since then, like in New Canon, to make the Empire evil and more overtly make an allegory for fascism have actually, at some points, missed.
Interesting. Interesting. That's an interesting take. I like that. Yeah, I've gone back and forth on this question myself, as someone who looks at it from a political science standpoint. Obviously, from a moral standpoint, I think George Lucas would absolutely go yes, 100%. No bones about it. As we kind of begin, as we go in the beginning of this discussion, for George Lucas, the Empire is fascist. It's Nixon's America. Emperor's Nixon.
Mm-hmm.
It's Sprich Nixon. Like, that's an absolutely a big thing. But we could go. But Red, expand a little bit on what we talked about at the beginning of like the Empire was always a concept in Star Wars that kind of evolves over time, especially and then kind of became more of the Nixonian America that George feared was happening. Kind of things.
Yeah, because originally, was the character Valorum the character, because Vader is a merging of two characters.
He's a merging of Darth Vader and Prince Valorum, and they're kind of both Sith Lords. Peoples.
Right. Who was the
And the Emperor was just the dude.
Yeah, because originally the Emperor is the head of
Very
the
doomed.
Empire, but he's just human. And there's more politics, but also kind of less. It's more difficult to kind of pin down because we obviously only have that initial script.
And the
Uh,
comic, if you ever read the comic.
well, yeah, that's also just based on the script, but
Right.
the but yeah, like a lot of the aesthetics of characters go back to several. So like Vader is a general in that, and Valorum is more of the dark side Sith character, and yeah, he's a prince and everything of the Knights of the Sith. Uh,
I think it
and a
started.
lot of that just gets merged into one thing.
Right.
Because he's like Vader's or not Vader. Valorum is the bodyguard to the Emperor,
Hmm.
who's again just a guy.
Right.
Cost Dashet.
Right. The original trilogy, of course, obviously, they does have a lot of, that Nazi imagery. You got stormtroopers, obviously. You got the blacks, the whites, the reds. You know, although technically for the good guys, the ending of New Hope is somewhat based off Triumph of the Will. Um, so you got that. Of course, you got the Royal Guard, pure red. So yeah, I think that the original trilogy, at least in terms of like just imagery alone, just says, yeah, we're in a very fascistic state. Um, Obviously, based off of Lucas's own fears of Nixon and all that stuff going on at the time,
Yeah, his
Vietnam.
belief that Nixon would seek a third term.
Yeah. It was all coming out of the Vietnam War, of course. What would your overall take of the Galactic Empire portrayal in the original trilogy be? Kind of had to analyze it. Red. What would your?
Uh, I mean, in the original trilogy, there's a lot of shorthand, and the Empire is sort of, from Lucas's perspective, meant to be the U.S. in Vietnam,
Mhm.
but using Nazi imagery and British accents. I think not even intentionally to obfuscate so much as just make that more obvious, which I think in hindsight now goes over people's heads a little bit more because back then it was more like, okay, yeah, there's obvious ties to this being uh the US in Vietnam. The audience watching the theater, the young people watching in 77 are going to get that obviously, and the tie-ins are Lucas being a little spicy and saying it's just like the Nazis and the British. Nowadays, the spicy thing is it's kind of like the Americans in Vietnam. Like we've flipped around to the point that that becomes the subversive thing.
Yeah, it is interesting how kind of these things play differently over time. Um, as you know, as time's gone on, and whatnot. It's always interesting when you hear people talk about it, both in terms of like, oh, it's interesting you see it that way, and also very annoying when they don't get it. It's like, I mean, yeah, I would, I'm not disagreeing with anybody who calls the Empire space Nazis. They are. Um, but it is interesting that yeah, how it have a different view today to a certain extent, especially if you don't know the history of the '70s. Um, and then I find it interesting as we kind of get into the '80s post Return of the Jedi, um, how a lot of the world building lore books at the time, the Imperial Source book, especially, which I actually have read. I've found it and I've read it just to kind of get a look at it. Have really they doubled down on like the direct Nazi parallels, like Comp Nor is the party. You got the Imperial Intelligence and IFB, Gestapo, all that stuff.
The New
Um,
Order.
yeah, the New Order, of course. I don't think the Imperial flag got the red, black, and red until later. Um, stuff like that. Um, how much of that stuff are you familiar with in terms of like the Imperial source books and kind of the more overt world building it tries to do, and it has stuck. We still have stuff from that source book to this day.
Yeah, though sadly Compnor has kind of been overshadowed.
Yeah, that's too bad.
The
Uh,
ISB has sort of taken over their role.
it's interesting. Just kind of this is something we'll kind of notice in as we if we when we get to the Star Wars X-Wing books is like you have the ISB and Imperial Intelligence both existed, but it felt like Imperial Intelligence was more important than the ISB, and now it's reversed, where it's like ISB are more prominent. It's like you barely hear about Imperial Intelligence anymore. Um,
Yeah, looking back at the source books, which exactly would you say was meant to be the SS?
I thought the stormtroopers themselves were meant to be the SS, quite frankly, because like they were the elite shock troopers that kind of just became the army, which is still kind of true.
I guess. I mean, they're kind of also the stormtroopers.
Well, they are called stormtroopers.
Yeah, but they are the military, like the elite military being used in every front, which is definitely late war SS. When the SS has like its own air force, its own tank divisions, its own intelligence, and just subsumes all the other stuff. Where they're like doing the job of like the foreign office and stuff.
Right. I guess maybe that would be the Imperial Intelligence then, because ISB barely gets mentioned in story stuff after a while. Um, do you think that a lot of this come from the fact that Lucas himself was always the most obsessed with the Vietnam Nixon stuff, while everyone else was kind of like, "Oh, World War II." I hate to say like no one else got it. I'm sure there were people who got it, but like Lucas was always the most Nixon obsessed Star Wars creator out of everybody. Well, everybody else.
Yeah, and I mean, you've watched Corey's Datapad's videos on the politics of each prequel film.
Oh yeah, I love that stuff.
Yeah, and like you get in some of those interviews, some of the other writers partially just saving face in the media climate of post 9/11, but to some extent, Corey kind of mentions like it does seem like a lot of the politics are more there for George than they are to some of the other people involved.
That makes
Like,
sense.
I don't think George would, if asked in an interview, be as overtly like, oh no, there's no direct politics. I think some of the other people involved might have just gotten a chuckle out of, you know, Lot Dodd and Newt Gunray. Whereas for George, it's like, that's kind of obvious. This is a very big point that he's trying to make.
Right. No, that's absolutely true.
I mean, Valorum is Clinton, like that.
Why didn't Valorum party and then doing a saxophone?
I mean, didn't Valorum have an affair with that woman in his booth thingy?
I don't remember if that was in Cloak of Deception or something, but that would be that should have been in the movie. But no, you're right. I think. Do you also think that it's also because of just, and this is kind of where Star Wars the business meets Star Wars the art, to a certain extent, trying to make the Empire more palatably evil. So it's like, oh look, they're the Nazis because the Nazis are the other thing. The thing that's gone and doesn't exist anymore because we crushed it.
Yeah, I think it's that, and also the people write like the source books and everything in the military fiction, like the X-Wing books, like sort of the Thrawn trilogy as well, the little bit less so. Because that is really much less military fiction than the X-Wing books and Black Fleet Crisis and stuff.
Right.
It is more space opera. Uh, and yeah, again, like the source book stuff
Mhm.
are a lot more oriented to that kind of. I feel like there is sort of a conservative in the like lower C sense of the term
Right.
thing with military science fiction and tabletop wargaming stuff, there is sort of a tendency there to be interested in World War II as well, in particular. And when it comes to like U.S. military stuff, especially in the Vietnam era, at least less of an interest in using that as like an embodiment of evil. Like maybe if it is mentioned, it's more of a fixation on just the technology, and evil is just the institutions of the Nazis, but not necessarily an explanation of why too much. So you'll get generic or definitely evil things occurring, but there's less being said, and the stuff gets a lot less biting. Like I've been rereading through the Rogue Squadron books, and much as I love them, the politics of the Empire are kind of less interesting there. I mean, Isard herself has her own flaws as a villain, but I think the Empire and how it's portrayed overall is kind of not sanitized because it does a lot of evil stuff, but it doesn't seem as real in some ways as compared to even the brief bits we get of essentially the Empire in exile in the Thrawn trilogy, where you have like all the emphasis on conscription and the sort of hierarchy always existing. I mean, I was saying that yesterday or whatever with Corey's video on Thrawn, where I was commented on that in the comments on that of I think a lot of people miss the fact that there's a Zahn is trying to say something with Thrawn overlooking what he sees as his lessers and the Empire's lessers ever being able to overcome him, and that there's kind of something being said there that the most competent Imperial, who is even an alien, who's a credit to his people or whatever, the token thing, is still going to carry on the fundamental flaw of the Empire, and that gets him quite literally stabbed in the back.
Yeah, it's interesting, and this kind of gets into the next point of like the '90s EU. That you know, I feel like you're right. Like I remember the original Thrawn trilogy, and you're right, talk about the conscription and stuff like that, and the guy gets his head chopped off that one time. But outside of that, it's kind of imperial brutality is kind of never shown that much. I mean, it's always the military side of things as well. It's also kind of interesting again that the original trilogy also doesn't show a lot of the civilian impact of Star Wars outside of Alderaan and like Tatooine.
Well, yeah, Tatooine gives us the big one, I think.
Yeah, and now the Alderaan, of course, blow up a planet. Do you also
can't be understated just how freaking dark it is that like 30 minutes into the first Star Wars film we get Owen and Beru's burnt corpses.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Skeletons and all. And then they're never mentioned again. But do you also think that a lot of you think it's a so you mentioned it's military fiction. Do you also just think it's just a symptom? There we go. A symptom of just post Cold War culture at the time. I mean, Soviet Union collapses. USA kind of seems like it's in the clear. It's like what is it's like we're kind of like we're greatest. All that's junk. You think?
Yeah, 100%.
And that's Tim Zahn and Michael Stackpool. As much as we do like them, like they fall into those traps. Anyway, Craig.
I think there is just a lot of resting on one's own laurels, and especially in the 90s, the Empire does sort of become just a almost apolitical pastiche of the Nazis in terms of the aesthetics, and then sort of a propaganda Reaganite view of the USSR, which is funny considering Lucas's own opinions on Reagan, the USSR, and Reagan on the USSR, considering him trying to sue about the Star Wars program.
Yeah.
I don't think Lucas was exactly a fan.
I don't think so. I don't think he was. No, and also, that's kind of where stuff like a lot of the Empire's evil is kind of blamed on Palpatine and just crazy Darksiders, right? Like
Hmm.
I will say that I do think the start of the EU with Thrawn trilogy still kind of holds. I mean, it's there. It's definitely the seeds are planted, but I do think it's not as bad as where it will end up. But like there is a little bit, like with Pelion, of like Vader and the Emperor were just these incompetent dark side crazy people, and then everyone else in the Empire was like just trying to keep the ship going as best they can, which instead
Yeah,
of like,
Star Wars falls right into a lot of clean Wehrmacht
oh,
myths.
oh yeah, definitely. So I mean, that's kind of again where the source book again kind of starts that as well, where it's like, and even the X-wing books, I would say. I mean, I haven't read them yet, and we might discuss this when we read the comics. So a little bit of like, oh, here's Baron Fell. He's a noble Imperial fighter, but there's Crazy Izard of the Secret Police. She's evil and backstabs everybody and seductive. Uh,
Yeah, the earlier stuff definitely does a better job, I think, with Evil Empire, but it does sort of shift away, and we don't really get that. Well, the first book doesn't have much in the way of like civilians or anything.
well, that's true. Do you think Star Wars falls into the clean Wehrmacht trap just because, again, of the culture of the '90s, where that still was a big thing, maybe compared to now? Like, I mean, I don't know what people were thinking back then, and I wasn't born. Where more people
Uh,
were willing to believe that stuff, or it just do
I
Tim
think
Zahn and Stackpole believe this stuff?
partially. I mean, isn't Dooku partially based on Robert E. Lee?
I don't know. I've never
I,
heard
I mean,
that.
I think visually that was literally the intention.
And that was, and that's
Uh,
interesting. I mean, I get the beard.
the whole Confederate thing, but also like, I think there is a lot of that in. I mean, there's that 40-year cycle, I think it is, or 30-year cycle, where like there's nostalgia for the 60s in the 90s, there's nostalgia for the 70s and the like 2010s or whatever. You move in these cycles. Uh I think, I mean, you see it in History Channel at the time when in the 90s and in early 2000s the joke was History Channel was the Hitler Channel. Because it was all just programs about the Germans, and a lot of clean Wehrmacht or buying into propaganda. And I think because you have this ascendant uh, US in the
right.
90s and even into the 2000s with also nostalgia for and myth making about the greatest generation. You have all the stuff with Saving Private Ryan and everything from Spielberg, really. Forrest Gump, like this pastiche sort of. I mean, I guess that's less Greatest Generation, but that is the ultimate Gen X film. Uh,
Mhm.
and if only we could, things could be more like such and such past generation, and there is this need for,
Mhm.
I think, the Nazis to be part of cinema again, for that to happen, for there to be big heroic enemies to fight again, and almost a longing for that in the late 90s. Uh, and there's all kinds of stuff. I Was it Chomsky who has like a criticism of Saving Private Ryan when it comes out, where he essentially predicts like the exact cultural longing that will be sated shortly, like a year later when 9/11 happens. And he's essentially like, I'm getting the sense that the US really badly wants bloodlust and justification for that. And then it's like a year later, oop, there you go.
Yeah, and to go back to the apolitical thing, I mean that is one of the more fascinating things about the Legends expanded universe post Endor stuff, which I'm not going to say it doesn't have merit to it. I mean, it's certainly an interesting way to take the story. But, the Republic and the Empire essentially just kind of like, okay, we're just going to make peace. You can have your rump state, whatever. I mean, it's very. I mean, first of all, it does feel very sci-fi, where it's sort of like other sci-fi universes. It's like you have the Federation, which is like the only democracy, and then everybody else is kind of a version of the Empire. It's like the Klingon Empire, the Romulans, the Cardassians. It's like none of them are democracies. In the Western liberal sense. And it does, and Star Wars kind of went that route with the books, where it's like, okay, New Republic's going to be America, Western democracy, and then the Empire's like, you're just a country we just got to deal with, and maybe we'll team up when the aliens come and try to kill us all. I always wondered, Red, like, and as someone who's very, a Legends fan themselves, how did you always feel about that decision being made of like Empire and Republic just kind of making peace, and kind of like the war peters out eventually?
Yeah, I never liked it. I get that they create the Vong and everything, and so you have a reason that they're building to for a peace and then merging, but I think it just loses track of what the Empire is and is supposed to be, and just needs to keep telling stories. So we move on, but we can't get rid of the Empire because it's so essential a part of the story, and people like nerds have a weird obsession with Nazis, and so we can't get rid of them as a faction because people want to play as them in RPGs and stuff, or they want the aesthetics, and so they just more and more dilutes.
Yeah, I've always had problems with that too. Always had problems also with the fact that Empire just kept going after Dark Empire. That's just a mood thing. But yeah, it really, the Empire just kind of becomes, just this, very, as you say, apolitical. It's like they're just military. I actually find it funny. This is something I really think is kind of interesting, and I don't know what this says about Star Wars, but in if you ever go to the Legends and Canon tabs of the Galactic Empire, you know how like they have the government types and whatnot. Canon is willing to say that the Empire is fascist, but the Legends tab doesn't. It's let me look it up. Here you go. It says the Galactic Empire Legends blah, 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 they are in Legends a humocentric authoritarian empire. That is the organizational type. In Canon, it is fascist dictatorship, stratocracy, and reincarnated Sith Empire in secret. Everything else is the same. I just find that interesting. Like, wonder why they classify it like that. Although I do know that the actual source books have called the Empire fascist in some of the newer stuff. I guess that gets us to like the early 2000s, where it's really interesting. You have the Vong stuff going on at the same time as the prequels. So it's almost like you can almost have two competing kind of ideas about the Empire and politics in Star Wars, where it's like you have Lucas doing the prequel, and obviously, like, oh, this is how the Republic, this is how democracy gives way to fascism, and this is how Nixon came to power, and blah blah blah, all that good stuff. And then you have on the one side, the Long War and the New Jedi Order stuff, where basically it's like, at best, some authors still remember, hey, the Empire is still really flawed. It's just the Vong right now are really scary and worse, so we kind of have to work with them, otherwise we're all going to die. To just, they're the Empire, they're the good guys now, because we're all kumbaya against the enemy from without. I don't know. That's just really interesting to me that we kind of have those two parallel tracks. What do you make of that?
Of which tracks?
The early 2000s of just like you have on the one hand the prequels being the Bush critique, the fall of the Republic, kind of remembering, hey, these republics are corrupt and they fall. While on the other hand, you got the new Jayor just going, Republic and Empire teaming up against the Vong. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of with the Republican Empire against the Vong stuff is a lot of that is kind of just to hell with whatever government or administration or ideology, we're gonna just be defiant and do action. And towards the end, the Vong War definitely does go into a more introspective thing. I mean, you have all the stuff with the Jedi not wanting to genocide the Vong or trying to show that they could have a actual peace without both sides just destroying each other. But Star Wars likes to fall into this trend of its hero characters breaking the rules or whatever, or having like, oh, red tape gets in the way. Like half of the Rogue Squadron books are just Rambo. They didn't let us win, and so they have to go rogue and do the heroic thing, and save the day because the dang bureaucrats, like, it's all 90s action movies, 80s and 90s action movies, cult of individualism stuff.
It's all my
And
Mothma's fault. She's holding us back.
yeah, I mean, it's Star Wars stuff really, really likes to fall into that quite often. And it's still very much a thing in canon. And, like the entire point of the New Republic most of the time is just sort of to get in the way.
So true.
Like, we need to get away from Boris Kvala and the good parts of the Republic. I mean, that was the thing that kind of annoyed me with Ahsoka. How, I mean, there are points in Ahsoka where it's just like, okay, this is as fascistic as the Empire is portrayed, and it's being treated as a good thing. I mean, Hera's whole speeches to Xiono are just so fascistic.
Don't make us like Senator Ziono. We don't want to like Cad's dad.
Yeah, it was just like Hera's just being a freaking Nazi, and we're supposed to like it. And I think showcases how when both your good guys and your bad guys are supposed to represent kind of the same thing, which is the US, you're gonna run into a problem where the similarities between these things that are based on the same thing that hasn't really changed are gonna butt heads. You can't have your republic or your rebellion be good representative democracy types that represent, are better angels or whatever, and also the select bad guys within it are all of the negative stuff, or the Vietnam War or the Iraq War, and we can just isolate those off onto either select individuals like Boris Vela or Ziono, or make them just the Empire. Because you're gonna accidentally stumble upon, oh no, those are the same thing. It's gonna just justify itself. You're gonna get, plenty of Heras saying Saddam has WMDs.
Right. No, you're right. Or sometimes it's the same thing where it's like, oh, Forrest Failure was actually a Empire spy. Thankfully, he never was. But that's normally how it always goes. Like, oh,
I
it's
mean, they
oh,
did have him unwittingly be. He's actually, he is essentially Thrawn's best asset, and Thrawn is intentionally using him,
that's
which
true.
is, I mean, it's a decade before, but is literally what you would get accused of by CNN and Fox News in equal measure and fervor if you were against blowing up Iraqis. That, oh, Saddam must love you, was always the thing people would say to like Janine Garofalo and stuff if they went on, CNN or MSNBC or Fox.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I just had this horrible thought. You see Hera going into the owner's office, and the first thing you notice, there's a plant in his desk. You know it's coming. You know it's coming. Delta Source is coming. Yeah. Another interesting depiction of the Empire. I think we'd be remiss to not talk about. I know it's one of your favorite things. I mean that in a good way because I know you like it. Is let's talk about the Fell Empire for a hot second.
Ooh.
Because that's another depiction of the Empire 130 years ago. The grand children of Jag and Jaina Solo. Um, so yeah, Red, what are your thoughts on the Fell Empire and all that?
I love the Legacy comics. I love John Ostrander.
Mhm.
The Fell Empire is everything bad about when people write the Empire. It is just excuse after excuse, and you have moments of clear villainy that are treated as, hey, this is a bad thing, but it's still kind of like, but he's so gosh darn cool. Like when the Emperor has like all of the people on an Imperial ship that pretends to be still loyalist, but actually had spies on it. He has the entire crew of thousands executed and the ship sent
What a nice guy.
back. And it's like meant to be a cool moment. And now, don't get me wrong, wiping out that entire crew and sending it back is cool. But like that is cool also if it's done to his guys. Like it's not really epic when it's one Nazi killing a bunch of other Nazis to send a signal to another Nazi. It's kind of like it's not moral defiance. It's how dare these other fascists think they're better than me. I am the better authoritarian.
I'm the benevolent one. No, I mean, I
Yeah,
mean,
it's not. It's not like a freaking Jewish partisan like tying a dead Nazi to a truck and hitting the gas and letting it run into a gas tank kind of thing as a symbol. Like, no.
yeah, and again, Legacy also kind of falls into that trap of we have Sith Lords, therefore they are the worst because they got the Force dark side ontological evil stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore they're the bad ones because they got the dark magic powers, and Fel doesn't have the dark magic powers. I love. Isn't Fel a Force user too?
Yes, but he and his fell knights, which are my biggest problem, use both the light and dark side for balance because the fell empire is gray, so literally their lightsabers are gray and they use the gray side of the force
Oh, Ostrander, you're breaking my heart.
while protecting an evil emperor. But it's okay because their job is to kill the emperor if he goes out of hand, which he eventually does. And so the benevolent centrists kill the evil emperor to maintain the purity of the institution so it can continue to be morally good, because the bad stuff was all only when the one bad guy who was still good at his heart went wrong, because it is
Yeah.
just the individual evils. Oh my god, it's just Operation Valkyrie. Why are we doing this?
Oh God, yes, it is. And what's funny is, I haven't read these comics in a while, but like, didn't Ostrander do a pretty decent job showing like the I can remember the fascization of the Republic in his Clone Wars comics? Like,
Incredible, incredible. And his America is perfectly portrayed in like, Reagan is a reoccurring character in his Suicide Squad run. Like, uh, he's so good with politics. I don't know what happened.
yeah, what did like that? That's a good question. I was
And
hoping you
his
would have
other
the.
Star Wars, I was going to say like it might be post 9/11, but his other Star Wars comics are post 9/11 too. He's writing
It's not a
like
Frank Miller thing. It's not.
yeah, he's writing like Empire and stuff concurrent with Legacy, and he's weirdly contradicting his own kind of morality. I think he just like I think part of the problem is that it's only a 130-year skip. If it's just a new empire that happens to carry over aesthetics of the Galactic Empire 5,000 years in the future, but it's kind of just another faction, it's way better. But when it's literally only 130 years later and they're still using like Bastion as their base and stuff, it's like, okay, this is just the same thing.
Yeah, but even then, it's like you could just make them still bad guys and remember this sort of stuff. I mean, not like post Endor stuff doesn't contradict all the time. I mean, Kevin J. Anderson writes and Tim Zahn writes stuff back in the '90s. Um, so yeah, I mean, I am genuinely curious about what happened there. Is it just because he's so tied down by the books? Was it like editorial or?
No, because he had a lot of freedom with that. I mean, he was allowed to just jump all the way forward.
Cause that's just weird then, right? It's like again, this isn't a Frank Miller thing where it's like Frank Miller got very right. Well, Frank Miller I think was always kind of right. It just got worse after 9/11. But and that's another thing I think that's also interesting about depictions of the Empire and stuff as well is you know like you said, there is a slow C conservatism in military fiction, and I don't necessarily want to just call out anybody's ideologies. I don't know it. I don't know these authors unless they say it. But like, I do know Troy Denning has said on record that he was a Bush era Republican when he was writing Star Wars at the time too, and you know I've never read the Legacy of the not the Legacy of the Force, the Fate of the Jedi, the Jason Solo stuff, where the Empire's in that too. How was the Empire treated in those things? If you ever read that stuff,
Pelion gets assassinated and Jason takes over, and that's all like Second Galactic Civil War stuff. The Empire's
Galactic
kind of along for
Islands
the ride.
goes really. The Galactic Alliance goes fascist very quick.
Oh yeah, during Fate of the Jedi, yeah.
Right. I've never read that stuff, so I was like, I don't know what the Empire's doing there. I just know like, I know some Moth wanted to join Jason Solo because like, hey, strong guy, yay, and then Jagged Fell becomes head of state. Uh, I guess before we kind of get into newer stuff, it's like, do you think there was like almost like a feedback loop almost between kind of like fans taking the good guy Imperial stuff, and then that kind of affects the novel with sort of like, like Thrawn wasn't evil because he's not the Emperor, being a cackling over the top dramatic person. And then, maybe Tim Zahn kind of starts buying his own hype a little bit, and then it kind of just feeds back into it. And then,
yeah, and I think a lot of there's also falling in love with the character of Thrawn, and they sort of do move all the good guy Thrawn stuff to the Empire of the Hand or just Ascendancy. So there's sort of a plausible deniability.
right. Yeah, it isn't, again, it's kind of interesting, again, like, going back to 90s stuff, it's like, Thrawn is like the more competent warlord, but then all the other warlords are just evil narcissists, except for Pelion, because he's the honorable one. Which he's not. He's still a bad guy. He's just more pragmatic. Just like can't go down with the ship forever. And that just kind of evolved into like good guy Imperials because they're fighting alongside the rebellion. I hate to say this, but is Legacy of the Force like the biggest reason for the Legacy comics, are the biggest reason for the whole good guy Imperial discourse? You think?
No, I think a lot of that is genuinely just fanon.
Okay, that's fair. Uh that's absolutely fair. But yeah, the Fell Empire is one of those things. Like, oh boy, sad too, because like John Ostrander is so good at all the other politics stuff. But like, I would love to interview. Is John Ostrander still alive?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
I would have loved to have gotten an interview with him, just kind of get into his head of like, what is your view of the Fell Empire? Is it like, does he see it differently and just didn't execute it properly? Like, I am genuinely curious about like.
Yeah, I wonder what his mindset with that was, especially because he also did like an evil empire well in the Hawkman stuff he did. Though Hawkworld might not actually be.
Well,
No, yeah, Hawkworld is his.
we
Yeah.
know his Suicide Squad stuff, which is
Hmm.
imperial to get. So you know, what's up. Um,
Oh wait, no, that initial miniseries is Timothy Truman. But yeah, the Hawkworld stuff moving forward is him.
right. So this kind of leads us now, kind of to modern times. Although I guess 2012 was like a decade again ago, but still, I do feel like one of the big things about the modern era, as after the reboot, was almost like some people. I mean, maybe I just get the sense, I could be completely wrong, where it's like there was a sense of like, okay, I think we went a little too far in making the Empire little, trying to add nuances, but that just backfires in our face and creates these good guy Imperial people, which maybe you can't help anyway, because there's always going to be nerdy nuts out there who just don't get it, unfortunately. So now we gotta go the opposite route, right? And you see, I mean,
Hmm.
obviously you see with Force Awakens, which is the full on Nazi imagery with the First Order. Aftermath of the complete 180 of the Imperial fall, where it's like, oh no, the Empire was this rotting, horrid institution. It's going to collapse quickly when the Emperor dies. Obviously, I don't have it with me, but we do have Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire, which, full on is just a parody of Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. So we do see a lot of return to the Nazi imagery. Um, I also think this has to do a lot with the fact that we see, we get to do those dark time stories that last. Apparently, Lucas was actually quite, he allowed for some dark time stories, but he wanted to keep a good chunk of it for the Underworld show that never was. Or so I heard. You know, we got more of the even later stuff with like Bad Batch, with like the Nazi science and the clones and stuff, and kidnapping the children with special abilities. Um, we got some of the allegory for America though with with Rogue One. I mean, obviously, I watched the Jeddah stuff, and I'm like, oh, that's Afghanistan. That I
Hmm.
recognize that instantly. Um, and obviously, stuff with Andor really honing in on that stuff as well. Uh, Even the post Endor warlords of Mandoverse honestly feel more like the Nazi cells in Argentina and like the Chrysler, not the Chrysler, like the Galen organization and stuff in in, in history and stuff. So like, I guess, do you think it's just again another byproduct of culture of just return the empire back to its evil Nazi roots, or is this,
Yeah,
or do you think it's a bit more of a directive of, okay, we went too far one way, we got to now just push the other, bring the pendulum back, or the mix of both?
I think part of it is just you have a younger generation of writers. Uh, you have more fraught politics going
Sure.
on, or at least a domestic sense of things being more fraught, which I think has emboldened people a lot more. Doesn't necessarily mean the politics are too much greater across the board, even if their politics are correct.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't think any of them have hit anything close to Andor, uh, and not just in terms of writing, but also just the politics there. Like I think a lot of, I mean, Aftermath does actually a good job of its portrayal of the Empire and its inner workings and everything, uh, and the politics of that. But like, I don't think any of or much of this stuff has, for instance, done a good job of accurately exploring what fascism is economically, except for Andor.
Want to nationalize the farms? That's what the empire wants.
Yeah, which is nonsense. It's like that's the thing that Andor does that's so good is focusing on fascism as privatization, because that is the key hallmark of fascism across the board is privatization of huge sectors of the economy and the crushing of like the way Paxton referred to it was Robert Paxton's way of referring to it was suppression of the left amidst popular enthusiasm. Essentially, that reaction after. I don't think you can actually have something be a decent allegory for fascism or a decent example of fascism without essentially having World War I.
I mean, no, you're right. And the closest thing Star Wars has to World War One, I guess, is the Clone Wars. Even then, it's not that great.
Yeah, like I think I was going through an article on 1138 that was pretty good, but there was a comment on it that I really liked that stressed the fact that uh there's this reliance on using fascism by Umberto Eco, which I certainly used to do as well, and this need to by like Western liberalism and like post Enlightenment thought to move fascism into this camp of old, like remove the modern context from it, remove it from being this very modern facing thing when fascism was obsessed with modernity. Like the idea of, oh, fascism is looking back to a mystical past is there, but that's also true of indigenous movements.
Oh
Like that's
yeah.
like it's because of course, fascism is not a textbook. I mean, it's 6 pages. It's also semiotics, which is about symbols and floating signifiers and you know concepts isolated from their meaning, or how isolated can they be. The idea of the word tree and the picture of a tree symbolizing the concept of a tree and all of that. It's not like a deep dive. These are, fascism is not giving you a list of these are all the traits of fascism. All of these traits mean fascism, or even one of these traits means fascism. It's semiotics. It's not meant as a descriptor, and it should not be treated that way. It's a completely different school of philosophy, and specifically of philosophy, not political science. But it's easier to just rely on the shorter, more easy thing that also can be used to essentially make fascism into just this thing that looks backwards instead of arguably the continuation of liberalism and Western thoughts. And then you have to get into all of the stuff with European philosophy post World War II and the Frankfurt School, which is hysterical in the way that the alt right has tried to use that as a communist conspiracy when it was quite literally a right wing conspiracy funded by the CIA uh, to smash left wing movements and sort of divert popular energy away from a lot of political theory that was going on in the East and sort of stagnate things. Gabriel Rockhill is a fantastic writer and lecturer for if you want to look into that stuff. But I think the Empire in Star Wars works as using the aesthetics and having the general ideas of fascism, but it is just kind of
Evil.
people need to not use Star Wars or anything fictional as their example for what something is
Oh
in the
goodness,
real
I
world.
agree.
And I think we're running more and more to that problem with the sort of infantilization, how people will use like Harry Potter to describe politics or Marvel movies now. And I think we run that risk. And it's sad because that initial intent with Lucas is so different from that. He's not using it so much as an allegory, he's venting off anger with it. Like the comparisons are not there to be one to one or even necessarily sensical. They're there to give off a vibe with the implication that the audience knows why X, Y, and Z are wrong and bad. He doesn't need to, you don't need the Empire to be your explanation for why the Vietnam War is bad. And if you do need that, especially if you're sitting in a theater in 1977, there were some serious problems. And I think Lucas would have to have a talk with them.
Educate yourself. No, I mean, look, I love to call Palpatine Space Nixon all the live long day. It's fun. But, Palpatine's also an evil wizard who zaps people. It's more of a vibe than just saying Palpatine's exactly like Richard Nixon. Another thing about comparisons, just to kind of, because I do like doing comparisons, even though I agree with you. I think we do it a little too much. I always feel like another thing about the Empire. I'm gonna be honest. This is politics in all Star Wars. Where are the masses? Like, we always see Palpatine, he's talking to the Senate. It's I always think of, to me, fascism also kind of needs a little bit of the masses as well. I mean, middle class probably. It's we're Palpatine talking to large crowds of just individuals. It's when you always see the port of the Empire, it's always in the Senate halls or the military. Where's the large, massive crowd with the big signs?
I think you need that petite bourgeois support. I mean, of course, yeah. At the end of the day, Hitler's main supporters were upper crust of society, but there were so many lumpen proletariat and middle class that thought this was their way to get ahead. This was their way to, benefit or continue the economic boom that certain industries had after World War I, but without an increase of taxation upon the middle class and the upper class. Thus, you would need to continue that increased production, which would mean continued militarism and the increase of those industries, and in keeping up that rate of growing profit would mean new colonies, which is why Italy becomes fascist so quickly and goes into Ethiopia and Libya, and would require a popular crushing of the labor movement because they had power and had gained even more power, especially in Italy. And so there would need to be this crushing of opposition to the idea of lowering wages or keeping wages low, increasing productivity, etc. The people who benefit from that were middle class and upper class. But we do kind of see that in Kenobi.
I was about to say Kenobi, yeah.
Zach Braff's mole guy is kind of the perfect example, and it's not because he's a trucker, like I think a lot of people felt, but it's because he's petit bourgeois. It's just kind of on the nose. It works.
I mean, he was a few steps away from saying, "I'm going to make Palpatine just trying to make the galaxy great again."
Yeah, it's he's a small business owner. It cuts both ways with Star Wars because that's what you get with when I realized it just clicked for me with Rise of Skywalker that at the end, what is the heroic moment? It's the boaters. It's the beautiful boaters Trump talked about. They all show up in force. It's the flotilla of beautiful boaters that Trump wouldn't shut up about in his last year of his presidency. That's who showed up. That's that fleet. They say people. It's people who own ships.
Petit bourgeois once again just deciding the galaxy. But no, I've always kind of I know the whole point in the lore is, Palpatine doesn't show himself ever again after he gets himself scarred. But it's when he does the big Empire speech at the Revenge of the Sith, he's just talking to the Senate. It's where's the big crowds outside the his office, with the sign and the flag, like Palpatine.
I mean, I like that because it is kind of like this decision isn't something, it's a democracy, but representative democracy, Lucas's point, I think, is that it isn't actually democratic, or at the very least, it always tends towards fascism and decay
No, that's
because
true.
it's not involving actual participatory democracy. It's not actually democratic in the way people interact with one another. They pick people with existing interests and shared interests among their class or among their political, be it alliances or just as a political entity or whatever, to represent them. And so, of course, they would all cheer on the Empire in the same way that, Lucas was witnessing them all cheer on the Iraq War or the war in Afghanistan or
Vietnam.
uh when episode 1 comes out with Clinton running to the right of Bush throughout the election. Bush famously complained about that on the campaign of like every time he put out a tax policy, Reagan would go to the right of it. And he was like, what the heck am I supposed to do?
Right.
If I say kill like half of the poor people, Clinton's like kill 75% of them.
We're gonna okay, how do I do it? We're gonna. I can't do Clinton. We're gonna kill 75% of poor people, and then I'm gonna do my Jack's phone. I'm just not gonna tell Hillary about it.
It's the Force, stupid.
um. Okay, I gotta ask you this question because I don't know how to naturally integrate it, but I'm gonna ask this question as someone who probably knows what I'm about to ask. Is Palpatine and the Empire Bonapartism in the Marxist sense? I'm gonna go on this weird tangent for a second, but like I've always wondered that. I know it's a silly question for us.
It does fall apart without him. I mean, I think from the perspective of the galaxy, or from the Republic specifically, that does not know that he is secretly behind both sides, yes. He constructed all of it, but for everyone else, it kind of is Bonapartism, especially in the Louis Napoleon sense.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking
Of
about.
like
The third one.
Specifically stepping into that position, that crisis, and being the representative of the liberals, and then sort of just creating a new conservative paradigm, taking on it upon himself to be the representative of liberalism with no, with no actual liberal policies or whatever. He'll just be the avatar for that, and then be in a coalition with the entire conservative faction. And when there is any opposition to that, he just wipes it out. Yeah, it kind of is Bonapartist. I mean, Bonaparte was sort of the actual Napoleon Bonaparte was sort of an inspiration for Palpatine, I'm pretty sure.
I mean, they all were to a certain extent. Caesar, not just Nixon. No, I've actually done a little bit of study on Napoleon III, Louis Napoleon. There we go. And I know about the whole Bonapartism thing. And, like he was elected the president after the revolution that overthrew the July monarchy, and nobody kind of thought anything of him. And then it's like, oh, nobody noticed, like he was just stacking the government with loyalists, and then whoop, emperor.
And he gets the popular support of the petit bourgeois, or not of the petit bourgeois, but kind of the bourgeois against the monarchists and conservative, like old conservatives, in order to stop any threat from really breaking out amidst, what was the verge of civil war. And so he just puts to rest all of that, kind of in the same way that the original Napoleon did, but with the original Napoleon, it was halting the counter-revolution from destroying the sort of deadened, weakened revolution that was kind of already over, which is why Marx refers to it as tragedy, whereas Louis Napoleon is farce. There is no revolutionary spirit. Napoleon could have been actually revolutionary and was an actual Jacobin, and maintaining parts of the revolution, even though the revolution essentially ends with Napoleon, does still enshrine parts of actual revolutionary Enlightenment thought. And so there is a tragedy to it, but also because there were benefits to it as well. So it's not a wholly bad thing, and it's the best you're going to get in that moment in 1799. Whereas Louis III, it's just an embarrassment.
And he wasn't smart either. He screwed up a lot.
Yeah, which what I'm quoting for people who don't know is the 13th Brumaire of Louis Napoleon, in which Marx says, Hegel says somewhere that history occurs twice. What it doesn't specify is it recurs once as tragedy and then again as farce. Hence, tragedy, farce.
And also, like Louis Napoleon, once Louis Napoleon's out, it's just like, well, back to a republic, I guess. Like yeah, at least in canon, legend, at least the empire kind of just fractured, and that's the kind of more Roman Empire thing, just the mini states. Yeah, that is interesting. I want to go back to one more thing about the portrayals of the empire, and that's economics, which is something Star Wars doesn't really get into. Nor I think it really should. I don't think it'd be very good at economics. But
I want to know how much linen it costs to make a coat at what point in the production process.
Exactly. I think I will always find it hilarious that the whole American propagandized thing of the Soviet Union for the empire probably, in my opinion, goes back to the deleted scene of A New Hope, where they're like, they're nationalizing the farms, Luke. They're trying to stifle the businessman. Palpatine's taking on the petit bourgeois, which is Uncle Owen and Luke.
Yeah, it's funny because it's like, I think in reality that's like maybe even very directly meant to be a Vietnam thing, because of like, I mean, it was kind of already had been privatized for a long time, but that is such a big part of colonialism, especially in places like Vietnam, where these companies will show up with the support of their government, and then take the land, nationalize it to the company essentially, and then either sell it back or give it or rent it back to the people who worked it previously. And this was more the thing in Africa. You can see this especially in how Italy handled Ethiopia, and how the Germans did with their colonial empire in Namibia and stuff, where they take that land and then sell it back and sort of have people work on it, and that is such a big part of that stuff, where it is sort of nationalizing, but for the sake of a corporation like the Dutch East India Company or the state itself, but to kind of sell off to plantations.
Right.
Like the way like Matt Christman, the podcaster, political thinker, put it when talking about fascism, was the class was dominated by pastoralists, these areas of Africa that were dominated by pastoralists, herdsmen, people who were like all these different tribes, but who subsisted on that land, or hunted and herded cattle. But when the colonists show up, they grab the land, they grab the cattle, and they extort control of the locals through debt peonage and straight up confiscation of livestock, and that just continues to go on, which in the case of Namibia results in an uprising that then gets put down in 1904 and leads to the Herero genocide, which is the first genocide the Germans committed and the first genocide of the century, and the first huge wide-scale use of concentration camps.
Fun. Yikes. Yeah. So I guess that's kind of maybe what they were going for. See, kind of a little this like Lothal as well, and Rebels to a smaller extent as well. Very extractionist. Just get the resources, get the Kyber crystals. Built the TIE defenders for Thrawn. He needs his TIE defenders. What's actually interesting though, in terms of like the very small depictions of economics in Star Wars that we've gotten, which is actually something interesting. In Legends, of course, they nationalized all the separatist corporations that failed when the Clone Wars went out. It doesn't seem like, although I don't know what happened to all of them, but it doesn't seem like they're going that route with the corporations in canon, because there is a scene in the Bad Batch where the representative from the Commerce Guild is there, and it's one of those Commerce Guild aliens with the weird head. So it does seem like in canon that they didn't just take over the corporations. They just sort of like, hey, just okay, now you're with us again. I don't know what happened to Trade Federation, so that might have been destroyed. But like Commerce Guild is still there. Techno Union, I think, is actually still around as well. So they might be just like, we're going to keep you privatized. Just stay in line and don't do anything stupid.
Oh, that's a nice bit of context in the comments.
Oh, let's see. Oh, my friend Daisy. Yeah, this is my friend Daisy. She's from a Discord. She's from Ontario. So for the Ontario context, post-treaty, Maori land could only be bought by the crown itself before being sold on. There were also mass confiscations in the context of the land wars. She knows, my friend Daisy knows a lot about Maori history, so it's very interesting there. That kind of reminds me of the dealing with like the Mon Cala King and Charles Full a little bit. That has nothing to do with economics. But yeah, it is interesting that it would be interesting, Red, if they like what are some of the more privatized mega corporations of the empire? Like I think Tag Industries is back, so like the Tag families has a corporation.
Yeah, Tag is. I mean, this is one of those things that Andor did that was so good. Was starting off in the corporate sector, or not necessarily the corporate sector, but like starting off in a corporate zone where they're going right back to one of Lucas' inspirations for, I mean, kind of the inspiration for the Trade Federation, which is, I mean, Gunray is, what's Gunray's position? Viceroy. He's literally a viceroy. Like it's British East India Company.
Yeah.
The Honorable East India Company is its official name.
Right.
It says it's that stuff. It's private, like economic exploitation zones, like they did all over China and India. And so,
and the Caribbean.
Yeah, though I think those were often more directly occupied. But like in China, you would have these like just little slivers. Right. Like that's part of how I believe the revolution started in Wuhan in 1911, with like attacking those portions of the city or whatever, and that's part of what happened with the Boxers. Was attacking those zones that were allotted to European governments, and the Empire interestingly gives out that stuff. Like Ferrix is that way,
right?
Where it's a system that's given to be exploited by private corporations that are given the Empire's protection. And the Empire steps in when they're not able to protect themselves, with kind of the assumption that they're still, still the same people are benefiting either way. now it's just the Empire is going to have to be called in to directly oversee it because of corruption or inadequacies in protecting themselves. And you have that whole dynamic between Hine and uh, Karn over how to do that, with Hine not wanting to get the Empire involved and
Right.
all of that. And like it just Andor immediately sells me on it because it focuses on that. It's about the private sector in these corporatized zones that even back to the era of the Republic, it seems, planets like Ferrix were part of these sort of separate areas that would be profitable for extraction, and there might even be some benefits, like Marva says, like so long as like we didn't complain, so long as the trade remained open. And the point is then when that becomes inconvenient for the Empire, they will then crush that. In the same way that fascism is often described as the violence of the colonies and of the frontier brought home. That the, to point out the fact, that was why I was talking about Matt Christman. That was one of his one of his main things with his way of describing fascism is like, at what point is there a difference between what the Nazis start doing in 1933 and what Germany was already doing in Africa a decade 20 years prior, or even World War One sort of helps set the stage for that by bringing the senselessness of mass slaughter for nothing but profits on a sheet to Europe, and then completely desensitizes people to the point that they're willing to slaughter a whole portion of their own populations, and that is such a necessary part of it. So even without a situation similar to World War One,
Right.
Andor still sort of gets to that point at least.
So that's funny because it reminds me of. I remember I was on Twitter and looking at my buddy Dan Star Wars Centralized. He's reading some of the Karen Travis Republic Commando books, um, and aside some of the Jedi stuff, of course. You know, the Republic, the portrayal of the Republic during Clone Wars is fascinating. It's like it really goes into like like they're supporting dictators and doing some shady business and stuff. It's like, so in a way, it is kind of like the World War One thing for the Clone Wars, trying to make the Clone Wars almost World War One esque as
Yeah,
possible. Doesn't work completely, of course. I don't think you can. I don't think there could be a true World War One in Star Wars that works completely, but
yeah,
that
because technology is advancing so much is so advanced through Star Wars. You don't really get the huge change between in total 500,000 people dying in the American Civil War, and that being, as Ulysses S. Grant put it, the most sanguine and brutal of wars
right.
humanity has seen, to when he writes that, when he's writing his memoirs 20 years later, that many people, double that amount of people die in the opening hours of the Psalm.
Yeah.
It cannot be understanding. I think that's a thing we get a lot with people talking about like crypto fascists today, and I think people, not to undersell the threat of certain people, but I do think there is a problem where people underestimate the significance of World War One on being able to create a generation of people just completely feral and
Oh yeah.
like the Proud Boys are scary and need to be fun and everything. I do not think they are of the same. I don't think you can exactly compare them one to one to someone whose like significant childhood memory is being 17 and watching their entire every friend they've ever had get turned into a red mist in 1 second by a shell ricocheting off of something. Like that is there is something to fascism that kind of requires that mass death, and the Clone Wars being droids versus clones for the most part kind of hampers that.
Yeah, you can't, yeah, as much as you can maybe do, like, I don't know, Tarkin within like this horde battle and the trenches with clones. It's like I don't know how far you can take that. Right? It's like Anakin, can deal with Anakin a little bit because that's kind of the whole point. Is like the war
Yeah.
really kind of, he's already he has those impulses, but the war just kind of pushes that forward even beyond just the whole I gotta save my wife thing. But it doesn't. It's not like Tarkin, Pelion. A lot of the officers were in the Clone Wars, I guess, so to a point.
Yeah,
But
which is a nice touch of
oh
like,
yeah, Veers.
you Lauren and everyone. Like, yeah, this and that's something that Ostrander does so well in the Republic comics of like having these people who there's just direct continuity. Like Pelion's wearing his Republic uniform, and it is essentially just his Imperial uniform. And
Right,
he's in an
Lauren.
acclimator, which is essentially just a smaller Star Destroyer. And it's kind of like, where
You,
is the change? There's a reason why they used that for the story where the one Jedi who figures out that Palpatine is Sidious gets blown up and betrayed. It's like kind of to show, yeah, it's already there.
I mean, that's the genius of Palpatine's empire. Is it's like, hey, it doesn't. It's not really any different outside of like we just now got to change the business cards.
Mhm.
It's like here.
Which is something Lucas, I think, is doing on purpose in
Oh yeah.
the deleted scenes and stuff for Revenge of the Sith that put way more emphasis on the emergency powers and the expansion of the war machine because you were saying it's kind of like World War One. I think also it's a lot like military Keynesianism,
Oh, absolutely.
which you'll have conservatives at the time and now call FDR a fascist because government control, but there's also the point that for the absolute opposite reason of what those trolley people mean,
Mhm.
where you could argue that military Keynesianism was fascist, but that's very much from a left perspective and not from the one those people mean it by. But that, in order to create harmony for the war, there was a sort of concordant between classes where FDR is like, you're going to get in all these increased profits, but you're going to have the Labor Relations Board and you're going to have the AFL-CIO. Well, I don't know if they'd merged yet on the on the board of your companies and everything,
Mhm.
which carries over into Nixon. Nixon inherits that military industrial complex that never goes away after the war, and Nixon is able to maintain popular support all the way through his presidency overwhelmingly because, in part, America at home has that social safety net that came with the New Deal. It was chipped away at, but I mean, Nixon expanded. Nixon is responsible for the EPA and all kinds of stuff. I mean, we like to kind of joke sometimes that Nixon had some policies to the left of Bernie Sanders, and it's not entirely wrong, but it speaks to the environment of neoliberalism U.S. versus New Deal Keynesianism, where you kept the home front not only secure but pretty wealthy, that people were willing to sacrifice not only their freedoms but more importantly sacrifice a ton of people overseas for whom it always felt like Nazi Germany or at all times, but at home it could feel like you're just sitting in the Reichstag, sipping vodka or what's a beer, whatever a
I,
German drink is.
I mean, we talked about Napoleonism. I mean, Napoleon also did Keynesianism economics. There's a thing called Prussian socialism. I know, like the Bismarck did. There was a German welfare state as well. Bismarck wanted to crush
Yeah,
the socialists the old-fashioned way, just pay everybody off. Um,
yeah. I mean, Prussia was a military state.
Pretty much, yeah.
Like everyone was a soldier.
No, but and you're right. But I do think the Clone Wars, being that World War One allegory, doesn't completely work, but can, especially if you just want to like show the horrors of it. Because I do know there
Mhm.
are stories of like that is the point of like the Clone Wars is to make the galaxy so tired they'll be like, here you go, Palpatine, ultimate power. There you go. And does in some for some people radicalize them. Like Laura and like Tarkin. Tarkin was always kind of radical anyway, so it's like they just need the extra push. Um, this is where the allegory doesn't work for like Palpatine, because like Palpatine was like not fighting in the trenches or like he's the one who's okay with all this, and he was already a little psycho.
Yeah, but I guess you could argue it's kind of like if like those Thule Society freaks
Yeah.
that Hitler was radicalized by had lived long enough to take over. Like if
Right.
those guys hadn't been, dumped into a ditch by oh, what's his name? By like the Munich Soviet or something, or died during the interim period. I mean, I
Yeah.
guess you could kind of argue like Italy kept a lot more of that because you had more like aristocratic people and whatnot in the military.
But you still have the Prussian
Though
elite
they did,
in the German army for a long time.
yeah, and yeah, though those guys did also fight like in World War I. Though then again, Mussolini built around the black shirts who were the Arditi, who had like the most insane fighting of World War I and were just like nihilists.
See, this is again. This is like you said, Red. It's like, yeah, there are a lot of bad fascistic people out there, but it's like, well, you can't compare these people to World War I crazies. They're a whole
Mhm.
other level. They're dangerous in their own way today, but like, oh, World War I way worse and way scarier.
Yeah, and
Uh,
it goes into the whole thing of fascism or Nazism and kind of the differences there. Like Palpatine has all the esoteric stuff of Nazism, or some people would even say like when it comes to crypto fascists and stuff, like in Colonia Dignidad in Chile,
mhm.
being I've heard it described as esoteric Hitlerism specifically, like not even fascism.
Right. I mean, like I said at the beginning, the Empire kind of whatever evil you want it to be, or whatever the evil the author knows about at the time. But no, you're right. But yeah, I'm just trying to think if there's anything else we talked about the dark side stuff is sort of your Thule societies and whatnot. And sometimes we get into the little cults the Empire has every now and then,
Mm-hmm.
which is always fun.
It does create the weird thing of because there is ontological evil and stuff in the Star Wars universe and definitively proven magic, the whole like Nazis searching for Thor's hammer stuff becomes weird because that's real in the Star Wars universe.
That's true. That's true. That only happens in Indiana Jones and Marvel movies or Marvel comics.
It's kind of the problem you run into, yeah, with Marvel and like the Nazi race science stuff. We're talking about like ancient Bavaria with elves running around with Thor blessing the German people. And it's like, okay, but that literally happened in your universe. Maybe you need to realign the mixing of these things.
No, you're right. I mean, I'm sure like they'll try to counter it by having Thor fight Nazis and stuff. Like
That did
like
happen. He was summoned by Hitler in Invaders comic in the 60s or 70s.
oh, that's
But then
hilarious.
he was like, but I'm not gonna follow you, and he had like some reasoning for it or something.
Did he punch him or just like go away? It's like
I think he threw him.
okay.
Like I think he literally like sumo tossed him or something. It was great.
That's hilarious. But no,
Because even then they were like, wait a second, like, and I mean, of course, Jack Kirby would probably immediately realize that of like, wait, these are like exactly like the Nazis literally thought. I mean, they named like I think it was the operation to take back either the Kerch
mhm,
beachhead in Crimea or it was the counteroffensive to try and halt Operation Bagration that they literally called Operation Wotan, which is German for Odin. It's the Germanic Odin.
uh-huh.
Like they loved their weird esoteric. I mean, I
I
think
mean,
there was an Operation Thor's Hammer.
I think there was. I mean, Hitler loved Wagner and the Valkyries and all that. The reason why I call it Operation Valkyrie. Um, you know, So it's sort of like, well, we got to counter this. Make Valkyrie get Valkyrie played by a person of color. That'll
Oh, Thor's hammer is from. I'm thinking Operation Viking Hammer, which was actually from the Iraq War.
Um,
That says something. I think that accidentally made my point even more, but not in the way they intended.
but no, you're right. It's one of those funny things, and again, it kind of at its worst, it separates out the Imperial from like, oh, here are the crazy dark siders and they're ontological evil, while we're just the regular officers. We're just plain and normal and boring. Um, which is kind of 90 to you a little bit. The Thrawn trilogy does it okay because Thrawn's still the bad guy, even though Sabaoth is just a crazy clone, does lightning. Then you got stuff like Dark Empire, which is just full on just the Empire are demons. All the Empire are demons. And then you kind of get more again. The Fell Empire, I think, is unfortunately, in my opinion, just what I know, kind of the worst example of this, where it's like non-Force users, they're okay, but when we're fighting like the full-on ontologically evil faction, they're bad.
Oh, and Operation Wotan was actually part of Operation Barbarossa.
Okay, that's something. Yeah, that is weird when you think about it. Whenever you get into like, oh gosh, it's like even DC got those problems. Like, didn't the Nazis like the Amazons, or am I thinking of a different story?
No. The Nazis got Hitler had the explanation for why like the Jay Garrick Flash didn't stop the Holocaust is that Hitler got the Spear of Destiny, which is real.
All right.
Longinus' spear, and that put a mystical barrier around Europe, though they don't, I think, even specify around Asia as well, which, gotta love, but still, like, around Europe or whatever, which meant that American superheroes couldn't get involved. I don't know how that affected, like, Ted Grant or whatever.
I just know in Marvel, both Cap and Wolvie fought in the war. Yeah. Remember when Wonder Woman, the first movie, killed off General
Ludendorff? In hindsight, I don't think it was Ludendorff, but it was clearly Ludendorff. I think they like changed the name or something mildly, but yeah, that. God, don't even get me started on the fascism of that movie.
I thought it was Ludendorff. I thought because I remember we talked about it.
We both thought it was Ludendorff, but
like, isn't he supposed to be important later in history? Makes no whatever. Doesn't matter. Doesn't count anymore. It's wiped clean.
No, yeah, it is Ludendorff. Yeah, what the heck?
How can you do the putsch then? Does World War II even happen?
What the heck?
Well, that movie is weird and doesn't matter anymore. James Gunn Superman next year again. I know, right? Yeah. What's going on? Well, on that note, any final thoughts or anything you want to bring up about the Imperial depictions throughout Star Wars history? Anything that stood out to you? Has stood out to you over the past 40 years of comics, books, and shows and movies?
Not particularly. Though I just looked it up, and Ludendorff in the Wonder Woman film also kills Hindenburg. What the heck are the Nazis in the Wonder Woman universe then? What was World War II?
Was there World War II? There has to be. I don't know. It's just like the Red Alert stories all over again. I don't know.
But yeah, the Empire and Star Wars. Thankfully, we avoided getting into the selling the aesthetics and toys and stuff, because that's a whole other conversation
I
of
didn't
the
even think.
ethics.
I don't think. I think we would have to do a whole other podcast about that.
Yeah.
It's like, oh boy, there is a. Would that be a good? But yeah, that would be a. Oh boy, yeah. And of course the RPGs and stuff like that. Actually, I will plug one of friends of the show, Dot the Ferrex, on their Patreon. If you get a certain tier, I don't remember which tier you're supposed to get. They did an episode though about people who want to play the Empire and do Star Wars RPG stuff, and how that leads to not the greatest people in the world. I mean, I'm not gonna judge you automatically if you want to be, a bad guy in RPG stuff. Of course,
Yeah.
I don't want. I don't. But
It goes back to that thing of like, it is gross that like in Battlefield 5 you can play as a panzer crew and they kind of whitewash stuff, but maybe the bigger question should more so be should less be, is it wrong to play as space Nazis, and more, why is it okay to play as US troops in Vietnam or Iraq when Iraqis, unlike Wookiees, are actual humans, people that exist in the real world, and those victims are still alive?
Yeah, it's one thing to do Ewok hunt in Battlefront 2. It's another to do let's hunt down insurgents in Baghdad, the game.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. But go check that out if anybody's listening. Yeah, but the Empire and depicting it, it will be continued to be depicted throughout the years. I'll be curious to see where it goes and how that reflects our society. I'm sure eventually someone will just outright say, Palpatine's just trying to make the galaxy great again with his little red hat. Paga or something, I don't know. Yeah, I'll end it on that note. Thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Red, for joining us. This was a fun discussion. I love deep dives like this. Hopefully we'll get back to it and we'll start comic book reading again. I'm excited to do the X-Wing novels and maybe even jump back into talking about some of the stuff we talked about with 90s Star Wars. That'll be fun. Of course, you can follow me at JID20234 on Blue Sky. It's the only one it has, hence why the large numbers. Of course, you can follow us at the Yoncan Pod, EYEONTNONPOD on Twitter or on Blue Sky. And of course, follow us on the Star Wars Underworld Discord, where we hang out, do game nights, all that fun stuff. Again, thank you, Red, for joining us. And until next time, blow this thing and head home.